Have you ever done something that took every last piece of you? And I mean everything, your pride, your health, your dignity, only to stand there at the end of it and realize the one person you did it for wasn't coming? I have. I stood in the discharge lobby of Ridgewood Recovery Centre in Barrie, Ontario, on a Thursday afternoon in late November, holding a plastic bag with everything I owned at that moment. A change of clothes, a worn paperback someone had left in the common room, and my wallet with $63 and a health card inside. 6 weeks. 42 days of group sessions, one-on-one counseling, medical detox, and more honest conversations than I'd had in the previous decade combined. 42 days of fighting something that had been swallowing me alive since my wife passed. My son was supposed to pick me up at 2 o'clock. By 3:15, I was still sitting on the bench by the front door. I kept telling myself there was traffic. The 400 gets bad around Innisfil, especially if there's weather. I told myself his phone might be dead. I told myself a lot of things while the receptionist at the front desk tried not to look at me, and the sky outside started doing that flat gray thing it does in November in Ontario when it can't decide whether to snow or just make everything look like ash. At 4, I called his number for the 5th time. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. You have to understand something. My son is not a bad man. I need to say that before I say anything else, because everything that comes after is going to paint a picture, and I don't want you to draw the wrong conclusions from it. He was a good kid. Quiet, serious, the kind of boy who always finished what he started. He got that from his mother. After she died, pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end, something in him went rigid, like grief had set in him like concrete, and he decided that hardness was the same thing as strength. We stopped talking the way we used to. Months would go by. And somewhere in that silence, my drinking went from something I did to something I was. I don't blame him for the distance. I earned most of it. What I didn't understand, not until much later, was that by the time I went into Ridgewood, my son wasn't really making his own decisions anymore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The automatic doors opened and a cold wind came through. A woman who worked the front desk, young, kind eyes, the kind of person who clearly went into healthcare because she meant it, came over and asked if I needed her to call someone. A cab, maybe, or a shelter referral if I needed a place to stay tonight. A shelter referral. I was 64 years old. I'd spent 31 years as a licensed electrician, owned my own small contracting business for the last 18 of those, raised a son, buried a wife, and paid into this country my entire adult life. And I was being offered a shelter referral. I told her I was fine. I thanked her. I picked up my bag and walked outside because I didn't trust myself to keep my composure in a lobby. The parking lot at Ridgewood is long and flat, with a row of bare maples along the far edge that in summer probably look decent, but in November just look like they're waiting for something bad to happen. I walked to a concrete barrier near the edge of the lot and sat down on it. The cold came right up through my jeans. I had $63, no car. Mine had been sold months before I went in, part of what I'd had to do to settle some debts, and a phone with 12% battery. I was trying to figure out whether I could get a bus back to Sudbury and whether $63 would cover it when I heard footsteps on the pavement behind me. I turned around. The man standing there looked to be in his early 40s, medium build, wearing a dark jacket and work boots. He had the kind of face that looked like it had seen a fair bit of weather. Not hard, but settled. There was a pickup truck idling a few spots away. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "I was just visiting someone inside. I saw you sitting out here when I came in, and I don't know. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." I told him I was fine. He nodded slowly, like he didn't quite believe me but wasn't going to push it. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a Tim Hortons bag. "I grabbed 2 by accident," he said. "Chicken salad. You want one?" I looked at the bag for a moment. I said yes. We stood there in a parking lot in Barrie in November eating Tim Hortons sandwiches, 2 strangers, not saying much. After a while he asked where I was headed. I told him Sudbury. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said he was driving through to North Bay tonight if I wanted to ride that far. I looked at him. "You don't know me," I said. "No," he agreed. "But you don't know me either, and you took the sandwich." He half smiled when he said it. Something in the way he said it caught me. Some small recognition I couldn't place yet. His name was Owen. He had a calm way of talking, measured, like someone used to choosing his words carefully. We drove north on the 400 and then the 11, and he didn't ask me anything I didn't want to answer. He did ask about my son, because I mentioned him, and I found myself telling him more than I intended to. The way it had gotten distant, the way I hadn't heard from him in the weeks before I went into Ridgewood, the way he hadn't answered today. Owen was quiet for a bit after that. "Can I ask you something?" he said eventually. I said, "Sure." "Your son, when did you two last really talk? Not texts, not logistics, actually talk." I had to think about it. It had been before his wife came into the picture, before Dara. They'd met about 2.5 years ago. She was sharp, organized, the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately understood its power structure. I hadn't disliked her at first. I'd tried genuinely to make her feel welcome. But things shifted in ways I kept telling myself I was imagining. My son stopped returning calls as fast. Family dinners got shorter and then stopped happening. When I tried to reach him about practical things, the house, some investments his mother had left, whether we should look at selling the property up near Temagami, I started getting responses from her instead. Texts from her phone. Emails that started with, "We've discussed this and we think." Not from my son. From Dara. Owen listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "How long have you known that something was off?" I told him about a year. He nodded, like this confirmed something. Then he said something strange. He said, "I know your name. I recognized you in the parking lot. I wasn't sure at first, but when you said Sudbury, I was sure." I turned to look at him. "You probably don't remember me," he said. "It was a long time ago. I was 19. I was working on a job site up near Lively, summer crew." "Your crew." I stared at him. "I got in some trouble that summer," he said. "Not legal trouble, just I was in a bad place. My dad had left, my mum was sick, I was couch surfing. I missed 3 days of work and I thought for sure you were going to let me go." He paused. "You didn't. You brought me back to your place for dinner instead. You and your wife fed me. She packed me lunches for a week after that. You didn't tell anyone on the crew." I remembered then, not perfectly, but pieces of it. A quiet kid, dark hair, used to show up early and leave fast. He'd missed days and I'd thought about cutting him loose and then hadn't, for a reason I couldn't fully articulate at the time. "Owen McCready," he said. "I still didn't have the full picture. I finished that summer," he said, "saved enough to get my own place. Went back to school in the fall." A pause. "I'm a licensed contractor now. Residential and commercial. I've got 12 guys on payroll." I didn't know what to say. "I never forgot what you and your wife did," he said. "I told that story at my wedding. I told it when I signed my first major contract." His hands were steady on the wheel. "I never got to say thank you properly." We drove in silence for a while after that. By the time we hit the edge of North Bay, I'd told him more about my son and Dara than I'd intended to. Not out of self-pity, I was past self-pity, that had been one of the things Ridgewood had helped me put down, but because Owen asked the right questions. Calm, specific questions that made it clear he was actually listening. At some point, he asked if I had any paperwork from when my wife died. Anything about the property near Temagami, or investments, whether I'd seen any of those documents recently. I hadn't seen them in a long time. He pulled off the highway into a Tim Hortons parking lot, a different one this time, it's always Tim Hortons in Ontario, and turned off the engine. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear me out before you react." I told him to go ahead. "I've been doing some renovation work for a guy in Barrie. About 6 months ago in conversation, this guy mentioned a property up near Temagami. Said his wife had helped sort out the paperwork on her father-in-law's estate while the father-in-law was, his words, unavailable. Going through some things. The air in the cab of that truck got very still. "Last name Vickers?" Owen said quietly. "That is my last name." He didn't say anything else for a moment. He let that settle. Dara's last name before she married my son was Farrow. The man Owen had done renovation work for was named Keith Farrow, her brother. I'm going to be honest with you. My first instinct was anger. Hot, immediate, the kind that used to send me to the bottle because I didn't know what else to do with it. But I was 42 days out of Ridgewood, and I'd spent 6 weeks learning what to do when that feeling came, so I sat with it. I breathed. I looked out the window at the parking lot and the highway overpass, and a Canadian Tire sign lit up orange against the dark sky. Then I said, "Tell me everything you know." What Owen pieced together over the next hour was this. Dara had positioned herself, in the months before I went into treatment and during my time at Ridgewood, as the primary contact for anything related to my financial affairs. My son who loved me, who was grieving his mother, and had married a woman who was very good at making people feel like she was the competent one in every room, had signed documents he may not have read carefully. Documents that had to do with the Temagami property and with a joint investment account my wife and I had held for 22 years. The account had been moved. The property had a new name on the title. Owen had a contact, a woman he'd worked with on a legal dispute over a construction contract, a real estate lawyer in Sudbury. He'd already called her before he found me in the parking lot. He'd recognized me, he'd thought about whether to say anything, and he'd made a call. Her name was Patricia, and she had a cancellation opening at 9 the next morning. I looked at Owen for a long time. "Why?" I said. "You don't owe me anything. That was 20 years ago." He shook his head. "You don't get to tell me what I owe," he said. "You and your wife, you didn't have to do what you did. I was nobody to you, just a kid on the crew." He started the truck again. "Let me take you to Sudbury." The drive up was quiet, not uncomfortable. The kind of quiet between two people who don't need to fill it. We stopped once for gas outside of Sturgeon Falls. I called my son's number from the gas station lot. It rang 4 times and then Dara's voice came on. Not his voicemail, hers saying they weren't available and to leave a message. I hung up. Patricia's office was on Elm Street, second floor of a building that had probably been a law firm since the 70s, judging by the carpet. She was in her 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back, reading glasses on a chain. She looked like someone who had seen a great deal of people in difficult situations and did not waste time performing sympathy. She'd get around to it later. She laid out what she'd already found in the first 5 minutes. The Temagami property, a cabin my wife's parents had built in 1968 that we'd maintained for 30 years, that held more memories than I could catalog, had been transferred via a power of attorney document signed 8 months ago. My son had signed it. The POA named Dara as the authorized agent for my financial affairs during a period described as my incapacitation. The incapacitation in question was my drinking. There was paperwork from a family doctor I had never seen. The investment account, $240,000. Everything my wife and I had set aside over a working life had been liquidated and transferred to a numbered company registered in Ontario. Patricia had the registration number. The sole director of the numbered company was Keith Farrow, Dara's brother. My son, I believe, did not know about the numbered company. I need to say that clearly. He signed a POA because his wife told him it was to protect his father's interests. He signed it because he was grieving, and she was competent, and he trusted her. I believe that with everything I have. What I also believe is that he should have called me. Patricia filed the challenge to the POA the next morning, on the grounds that I had not been legally incapacitated. I was in voluntary treatment, which is categorically different from incapacitation under Ontario law, and there was no physician-certified finding of mental incapacity, as required under the Substitute Decisions Act. The family doctor whose name appeared on the supporting document, it turned out, had retired from practice. The signature was disputed. The transfer of the Temagami property was flagged for review by the Land Registry Office. A complaint was filed with the Law Society of Ontario regarding the notary who had certified the documents. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of phone calls and paperwork and mornings in Patricia's office, while Owen drove down from North Bay more than once just to sit in the waiting room. On a Wednesday, my son showed up at Patricia's office, alone. He looked like he'd aged in ways that had nothing to do with time. He sat down across from me, and he looked at his hands for a long moment, and then he looked at me. He said he hadn't known about the numbered company. He said he hadn't known about Keith Farrow. He said he hadn't known about the physician paperwork. He said he thought he was helping. He thought she had told him that the POA was routine, was temporary, was just a safeguard in case decisions needed to be made while I was in treatment and couldn't be reached. He said he was sorry. I want to tell you that I said something wise and measured and generous at that moment. I want to tell you I had some speech ready, but I didn't. I just sat there looking at my son, who looked so much like his mother when she was worried, that same slight crease between the eyebrows, the same way of holding his jaw, and something in my chest broke open in a way that wasn't grief exactly, but was something close to it and right next to relief. I said, "You should have called me. Even when things were bad, you should have called me." He nodded. He didn't argue. "I know," he said. Dara left the house 4 days later. I learned this from my son, who called me himself. Her brother Keith had received a formal demand from Patricia's office, and when it became clear that the legal exposure was serious. Potential fraud, elder financial abuse is taken very seriously in Ontario. The penalties are significant. Keith had retained his own lawyer, and in doing so, produced a chain of emails that implicated Dara clearly and left my son's signature as the product of deliberate misdirection. She hadn't expected him to get out of Ridgewood and actually do something about it. People who do what she did, and there are more of them than anyone wants to admit, people who look at a family in grief and see an opportunity, they count on the person they're targeting staying broken, staying ashamed, staying silent. They count on the bottle still being there, or the grief being too heavy, or the family ties being too frayed to pull back together. They don't account for a stranger in a parking lot who remembers his chicken salad sandwich from a Tim Hortons 2 decades ago. The Temagami property was restored to my name. The investment account took longer. Some of it had moved in ways that required additional legal process. But by the following spring, between what was recovered and what was established through damages, I got the greater part of it back. My son and I talk on the phone now every Sunday. He comes up to Sudbury every few months. We're not the same as we were. You don't go through something like that and come out the other side unchanged, but there's something between us now that's more honest than what we had before, and I think that counts for something. Owen came to the cabin in Temagami last August. He brought his wife and their 2 kids. His youngest caught her first fish off the dock, a small perch she immediately wanted to throw back, and she stood there at the edge of the dock with this perch in her hands, looking at it like it was a moral question, and Owen stood next to her and didn't rush her either way. I watched them from the porch, and I thought about a summer in Lively, and a kid who used to show up early and leave fast, and a dinner my wife made that I couldn't even fully remember anymore, but that had clearly mattered in ways I hadn't known. The people who count on you staying broken don't understand one thing about you. They don't understand that sometimes the person standing next to you in the worst moment of your life is someone you helped so long ago you forgot you did it. Kindness doesn't disappear, it just waits.